Welcome to Country Fried Rock, where we talk with musicians to find out what inspires their creativity. Country Fried Rock, music uncovered. Hi, I'm Sloan Spencer. This week on Country Fried Rock, I'm talking with an underground music figure from Georgia named Jack Logan. I first became aware of Logan's work with an underground comic series in the 80s that had Peter Buck of R.E.M. as a superhero. Yep, Pete Buck Superhero, Volumes 1 and 2 were sold in Atlanta and Athens. I purchased mine at Fantasyland Records. I think at the time you could also pick it up at both Wuxtree and Wax and Facts. Nowadays, Bizarro Wuxtree in Athens is a hybrid comic book store and record store. And it's the place that Logan talks about in our conversation where you can pick up discount vinyl. To those of us who saw R.E.M. as our superheroes back in the day, Pete Buck's superhero seemed perfectly plausible. Buck, on the other hand, reportedly not so much a fan of his stardom, especially early on. But Jack Logan is a lot more than just a really great comic artist. He also has thousands of songs, nearly 800 of which were released on his debut album, supported by Peter Jesperson, known for his work bringing us all The Replacements. So wrap that around with Jack Logan's friendship with a variety of music figures in Athens, which ultimately connected him to guitar maker and musician Scott Baxendale. If you followed all these paths so far, you're going to love Bones in the Desert. This week's record, a collaboration between Jack Logan and Scott Baxendale on Country Fried Rock. My guest today on Country Fried Rock is Jack Logan with a new record with his buddy Scott Baxendale called Bones in the Desert. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
This is fun. This is one of those like friend of a friend of a friend connections.
That's right.
We were talking a little bit before the show started. I actually was familiar with your art well before I knew anything about your music.
Yeah, well, that kind of happened before I got any notoriety for my music, because I did this Pete Buck comic book thing, and that was in early 80s. I can't even recall the year, but it was one of those things. I was living with a house full of other record fiend, musician kind of people, and I did it initially just to kind of amuse them, and then we ended up just doing a copy machine, basically, and took some by the local record store. The guy's name was Davy Giles. He's one of these kind of cool, but slightly, the record store guys in Athens, especially at that time, were kind of, you didn't want to, they weren't just say, hey, how you doing? They would look at you with a jaundiced eye, but, I said, well, what do you think of this? Could we sell any of these? And he just flipped over it. So it was cool. And then it went from there to being on MTV News. I remember sitting in a bar because somehow I found out the time it was going to be on, but MTV News, back when it was all the, those original DJ folks, 30-second blurb on it. So that was my first big taste of media stardom right there.
That's crazy.
It was neat. And the only bad side was it was timed very poorly as far as Peter Buck, because he, at that time, they were just kind of making that transition from, they were the underground darlings, everybody loved them, but they were starting to get more popular than I think he ever imagined they would be. When a comic book came out about him, I think it was kind of the last straw where he was like, okay, this is not cool. So he, I never did speak to him about it for many years after that. So I did kind of alienate the kings of Athens, but actually the rest of the guys loved it, I think. But I think it was just him that was like, I can see it too, because that must have been very difficult for him. Well, I think Michael Stipe embraced it, and Peter Buck eventually kind of embraced it. I think his plan was put out a few singles, tour around a little bit, and that, just be a cool little indie band. And it got a little bigger than that, as we all know. But
meanwhile, you had music going on, it just hadn't gotten out to the world yet.
Well, yeah, all this time was actually since the late 70s. I met these guys. There's these farmers from Indiana who had 4-track TIAC real machines. When I saw that, another friend who was also a musician had gone to school with one of these guys, and he took me up to this farm. And these are these kind of hippie guys that living out in the middle of nowhere. The town they're from is called Royal Center, and it's population like 800, something like that. It's just out in the middle of cornfields. But these guys had all these cool instruments, and they were recording their own original music on 4-track machines, and it just blew my mind.
Cool.
I just, at that point, I was still just kind of a record listener, and I imagined, to record, you got to go to this big studio and pay a lot of money and yada yada. And they were so kind. because I kind of expressed some interest in, can I at least write some lyrics or something? And instead of just, sending me out for beer or whatever, they actually let me participate.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was totally cool, because they had if I had been them, I don't know if I'd been so generous, or, well, I guess, when you live out in the middle of nowhere, some new blood is kind of, interesting. But I'm forever grateful for those guys, because that's
cool.
It's kind of what got me into it. And, I've been recording ever since.
Neat. And, those 4 tracks are awesome. I mean...
Oh, I know. I wish I still have my friend Bob Kimball, who I did some records with. I think he still has a 4-track reel. The only problem is the tape. It's getting more expensive and harder to find. David Barbie, who you may have heard of him, he's kind of going back to analog, and he's got some source, but he needs the big fat studio tape. So there may be more sources for that than just the little 1/4-inch stuff. I don't know.
I'm not a super gearhead. I just know stuff I've actually used myself.
I still use the same. People freak out to the fact that I'm still using a little 4-track cassette that I bought in 1995. Why don't you just get a digital thing? It's so much easier, blah, 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 blah. But I have this emotional attachment to this thing. I've recorded so many songs on it, and, I kind of like a little analog tape hiss. So, I convert it to digital, obviously, but, I just refuse to give it up. Because I found a little program that will convert to analog. I've totally got back into listen to... It's another kind of revelation I've had just over the last couple of years. I started buying cheap vinyl again. And I had bought this old console record player when we were up in Rochester, New York for a while at a yard sale. And I've drug it back to Georgia, and I've moved it into this little room, and I've started to listen to records like I did back when I was in high school, where I'm not watching TV, I'm not texting somebody or doing anything else. I'm just sitting there listening to the record and looking at the album cover, And I've gotten so much, it's like falling in love again, because I just remember, and a lot of it's nostalgia. I'm old. I don't care, It's fine. But there's something warm about it, and I can hear bass again. Because when I first started playing those, I was thinking, God, this thing's awful bassy. But it's just that the digital is so
tinny,
non-bassy. So,
Yeah. The thing that I really miss with digital music is I like both the visual and the tactile of physical music.
Oh, yeah.
And that just, the days and months and years reading liner notes and seeing, that's how
some of the elaborate, album covers that they came out with, that was half the fun,
Never miss a radio show from Country Fried Rock. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. Just search Country Fried Rock.
Hey, this is Jack Logan, and you're listening to Country Fried Rock.
I know from your comic, at least, and I think maybe even, did you do a Sgt. Pepper thing for Fellini's Pizza? It looks like your same stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
That's my other kind of major art patron is this guy, Clay Harper, who, started Fellini's. And for whatever reason, I did the Doug comic book for his band, the Coolies. Mm-hmm. He's one of the first guys I've met when I moved down to the Athens, Atlanta area, and for whatever reason, he took at one point. Did you ever spend any time in Fellini's or?
I was one of those kids keeping them and Fantasyland in business.
Okay, well then you may remember at one point there were all these rats drawn on the walls. That was me. He gave me all the beer I could drink at about $100 or something, and I would just go over there and get smashed and draw rats on the walls. It was good times. Free pizza.
Do you do your own album artwork?
I did for this latest one, yeah. Initially I did kind of a Photoshop thing, and I thought, I could get anybody to do that. So I decided to just do my stupid little drawing. And then the guy at Stomp and Stammer, and he wasn't the only guy to say this, but it's like, oh, man, you're really ripping off who's the guy that does the drive-by truckers?
Wes Freed.
Yeah, and I was like, man, I've been doing this long. I'm probably old enough to be his dad, and we're both ripping off German Expressionism.
That's
so
right.
Just lay off. But no, I like Wes Freed stuff a lot too.
That's funny.
There's a guy named Jeff Owens. He's amazing. He does all kinds of stuff. I don't know that I remember going to a show and I met his girlfriend. And I think he was supposed to show up and he never showed up. So, but he's done some stuff for like some other friends of mine, and if you ever get a chance, I'm sure he's got some kind of website or something.
Cool, check him out. Yeah,
he's really cool.
We kind of skipped over from your Peter Buck superhero comic series to the current record.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of Well, here's another kind of weird little thing, is that although I alienated Pete Buck a little bit with that comic book, he must have got over it, because he's one of the guys anyway, that recommended me. We had a band, Liquor Cabinet, we played around town, and he obviously had seen us play and saw something in it or whatever, but he recommended me to Peter Jesperson, who is the guy that ended up doing Bulk.
That was cool of him.
It was very nice of him, and I had seen him at shows. But after doing that comic, I was always just like, I will never approach this guy ever in my life. So, but later, many years later, I've still never really had a long conversation with him or anything. But he's just such a cool, he's one of these guys that knows a little bit about everything,
For everyone who's not obsessed with the Replacements, like I might have been at some point in my life, that's who Peter Jesperson's kind of known for in the Minneapolis scene for finding.
Absolutely. And see, that's another thing. I was when Let It Be came out, that's the one that I'd heard, and I liked a lot of stuff on Hootenanny and the Stink. Like a lot of people, I think Let It Be was the one that really turned me on to him, because it was obvious that they could do the hardcore stuff, and they had enough personality where it didn't just sound like everything else. They also obviously they could do other kind of music without being too self-conscious about it, or where they were just trying to diversify just to diversify. Obviously, Westerberg, as a songwriter, he was at the height of his powers right then.
Well, that's a cool connection. So you get hooked up with Peter Jesperson, and...
So, it was one of these deals where he had, some of the guys I was living with at the time I drew the Pete Buck comic were in a band called the Dashboard Saviors.
Oh, yeah.
And Peter Buck, I think, was pretty instrumental in hooking Peter up with Replacements and R.E.M. toured together, so there's a big connection there, And I think Peter even had done a little bit of road managing for R.E.M. at some point. Like, he told me some story about driving some little van up. They were opening for the Police or something. When R.E.M. still had their little rinky-dink gear, and just how odd it was to drive it into this big stadium and unload their van. But anyway, so the Dashboard Saviors guys, and also their manager, Lynn Hoffman, was also one that gave Peter Jesperson some taste. Because, like I said, I've been recording on 4 tracks or whatever, just pretty much nonstop since the 70s. And I don't really... It's one of my problems, I think, is I'm not really your normal songwriter kind of guy. It's like I'm keeping some kind of diary or something. I don't know what I'm doing, really. And I'm not real judgmental about what I'm doing, so some of it is just really awful, and some of it ends up being, okay. So I had tons and tons and tons of stuff that intrigued Peter, and he heard a little bit, and he liked some of what he'd heard, and he eventually approached me and said, can I hear some more? And I sent him like 800 songs or something like that, which it was probably not the smartest thing to do, but luckily he was kind of game. He's one of these guys. He still amazes me to this day. He is so enthusiastic. He's like 16 years old, he's like this kid that just saw the Beatles on the Sullivan Show, which is kind of what got him going, and he has never let up. He still has this burning pain, and he's been involved in the music business, which, if I don't want to insult anybody, but if you want to kill your love of music, get involved in the music business. I mean, that's the fastest way to get you just disgusted with the whole thing. But yet somehow he's been treated. I think he's had a lot of good experiences, but he's had some pretty bad experiences, and yet he still just loves music. So anyway, he was willing to listen to all this stuff, and when he came up and said, instead of recording a new record, I think let's just put out a bunch of this stuff that you've already got. I was like, really, dude?
You're kidding.
You gotta be kidding me. But it was kind of coinciding with Guided by the Lo-Fi, Daniel Johnson, all that stuff. So it made sense on some level.
Country Fried Rock is proud to announce our second compilation to raise funds and awareness for musicians' mental health services. You can help keep music alive by pre-ordering our second compilation for Nucci's Space. Check it out at countryfriedrock.bandcamp.com. All of the proceeds raised go directly to the model program for community-based mental health services, reaching the musician community of Athens, Georgia, and soon expanding to my hometown of Atlanta. Born of tragedy, but making a difference for people right now. Prevent musician suicide. You know an organization makes a difference when people like this step up to the plate and donate songs. We thank them, and we thank you for your generous contributions to preventing musician suicide. Keep music alive. A lot of artists are so hypercritical they can't get the first word on paper, and it's like the opposite of that.
Right. I'm complete opposite. And, I recently had somebody ask me, well, what percentage of stuff do you finish? I finished everything, basically, because I'm not working on, and I greatly admire people that have this vision in their head that they're trying to get out, like Brian Wilson. I think he's probably listening to the finished track in his head before he's ever played the first note, and he's just trying to reproduce that. Where I am, there's just stuff floating around out there, and I'm just trying to reel it in at the time that I'm doing it. So I've never really kind of had an idea of a finished kind of, maybe a couple of times where I kind of had a melody before it. But most of the times I'm just kind of making it up as I go along, which is, it has its advantages, but then again also it's why I'm not making any money at this stuff either, because, I think it takes serious, hard-working people that have this big vision and are able to do these elaborate things or have a lot more talent than somebody like me. I'm not being modest here. I really don't I was not raised in kind of a musical family or anything. I never played instruments as a kid. I just got into records. It was all about that. And even then, I never even considered actually trying to do something in high school or anything until like punk rock hit. And then I thought, well, I can scream, So that's what did it. And unfortunately, I probably should have stuck with screaming, but at some point I became enamored with like Joy Division and stuff, so I thought it was Frank Sinatra and tried to sing melodic country music, got drawn into that, and it kind of forced me to try to sing, which was probably a bad idea. I probably should have just kept yelling.
Yeah, something about love.
That's one of my favorite singles out all time right there. Costello at some point, too.
Sure.
He was doing the big croony thing, too.
Yeah, you can kind of do that croon talk stuff whether you can sing or not.
That's what I remain attempting here. There are people that can just naturally sing, and I would love nothing better than to just open my mouth and have it sound like Otis Redding or, whatever. But that's not the deal. So you kind of have to work with what you got, and I really like Keith Richards as a singer. My wife hears me say that, and she's like, you are insane. That guy cannot sing. Like, I should never open his mouth. And, people that are kind of into melodics, there's character to different voices, and not that I'm not saying that I've got any, but like Leonard Cohen, people, there are a lot of people that aren't necessarily technically good singers. So I always look to those people, too.
You've said that, writing is something that you're doing all the time, whether there's any intent behind, I'm writing for a record, doesn't sound to be related to this at all.
Oh, yeah. I mean, pretty much, once I got married and had kids, I had no intentions of loading in a van and, driving around and, dealing with club owners and getting drunk every night. I mean, it's just, I saw that this is just not going to happen. I kind of got started I was in my 30s when I got to go with Peter Jesperson. So most guys get into this when they're in their early 20s or whatever, and you got a good 10 years of just abusing yourself. But I had already kind of done that on a local level, and didn't have the stamina. So it became pretty clear to me that also with, just the way the music business has changed so much with the digital stuff, and just not that I don't get secretly rejoice in the fact that these greed heads that wanted to resell everybody on CD for more money, that cost them less to produce. I can remember just how gleeful they were about all that. Like, and now, foul, I can download it it have nothing to do with you.
It's working for you, though, digitally, to get stuff out, though.
Well, yeah, I think that's the good side. It's one of these things, be careful what you wish for, because my problem is, I know there's more good music being made right now, probably than ever in history, but there's so much of everything. And it's the same way with any kind of media, like, old movies and stuff. There's so much stuff out there, and you only have so much time to consume all this. But I would far rather have that than this kind of strict, where these gatekeepers are just deciding who gets to make records and who doesn't. So there is a downside to it, but I'll take it every time. And I think the smart people, I remember reading somewhere where Mike Cooley of the Truckers was saying, I don't care if people download my music. They might come to my show and buy a T-shirt, and that's where I actually make some money. You just got to be pragmatic about it all. The people that are the people that are doing well. I take no shame in the fact that I can't keep up with what's going on now as much. Right now my deal is there's a little comic book /record shop here in town that has a big room full of dollar records, just loaded, and you just never know what you're going to find in there. And it's usually it's in good enough shape to listen to, and that's good enough for me. So I'll go in there and spend $5 and just come home and listen to something that I never would have dreamed of buying, see what's in it, Just had more fun doing that. And I've listened to stuff that, my punk rock kind of snobbery is kind of, I'll listen to a King Crimson record or whatever now and not like, oh, these guys are just going on forever. I'm trying to kind of listen to what they're trying to do, And it's really changed me from much as punk rock was so important to me. There was a kind of negativity embedded in it, which was needed at the time.
Sure.
I think I'm still a pretty cynical guy, but it kind of, you get to the point where you're thinking about what you don't like all the time. I don't like that. I don't like that. Oh, they suck. Oh, listen to that. Can you believe they and kind of went down that road, and I'm just so glad to be off it now because I don't, if I don't like something, no big deal. I'll just find something else,
Country Fried Rock is a proud sponsor of Front Porch Fest, coming to Stewart, Virginia, August 30th through September 1st. Get your tickets now at frontporchfest.com.
This is Jack Logan. If you would like to check out Jack Logan and Scott Baxendale's Bones in the Desert, you can get it at athensmusic.net or baxendaleguitar.com. Rock criticism was a big deal for me as growing up. I'd get Cream magazine and Rolling Stone, and you would get these pieces, and even if they were critical, they were entertaining. They were long. Obviously, these people spent a lot of time doing this stuff. And, everything's sound bites now. And, what's the point of, just saying, this sucks? What some people do, and I don't know.
The nice thing about being geographically located where you are is you don't have to be on the road in order to have some other really fun, creative, musical people to interact with.
Oh, absolutely. Athens will just spoil you to death because, it hasn't spoiled me as bad because I started out my little musical journey as far as a live band and stuff in this town, Champaign, Illinois, where the University of Illinois is. And, it's probably as big as Athens, maybe even bigger when I think about it. But, I don't know. But in any case, there was this very cool, this is, say, early 80s, cool little tight-knit scene, but when you played, you had to be very creative about what you played because nobody wanted to, bars didn't want to book. There was one kind of live music venue, and they were mostly interested in different kind of stuff that was going on at the time than our kind of new wavy punk rock stuff. So we would rent out these little halls and stuff, and you'd be playing basically to the other bands and girlfriends, The fraternity people or just the student body at large had, they had no interest whatsoever. And when I moved to Athens, I went to this show by this band called the Barbecue Killers.
Yeah, I love them.
Oh, they're awesome. They're just noise. It was just this aggressive kind of, Laura Carter, I don't even know if you remember her.
Yeah.
She was just this force of nature.
Yeah.
But the club was packed. This was like a Tuesday night. It's packed full of just everything from kind of punk rocky people to fraternity-looking people to hippie kind of people. And I was thinking, what's going on, because it was all original music. It was all not particularly easy listening, music, as you remember. So Athens really isn't like that anymore either. That was kind of a golden era where just everybody was into it. R.E.M. was happening, so that had a lot to do with it. And B-52s had already been here. But there was a lot of other bands that were kind of making some national progress on the national scene. It was just a really good time. But even so, even though the audiences, I think, have gotten a lot more kind of cynical, and people will talk through your show, and it's just a natural progression, I think. But still, there are so many good bands and creative people in this area that it's just sick. And right now, Atlanta is really going through kind of a resurgence as well with the Black Lips and some of the Branford Cox and his band. And so, it's a great place for music.
By being in Athens and many, many creative musicians and still in the area, new people you've never heard of, people who everyone's heard of, just, a little of everything. What does that let you do with your music?
Well, oddly enough, Athens I live here, but it's never been much of and I know a lot of people and I play with a lot of people and record and have fun, but I've never been that much into playing live, especially since I've been married and stuff. I don't have time to have a band and practice all the time and stuff. So basically I've more or less kept to recording and stuff. Occasionally somebody will drag me out of my hole or whatever, but the opportunity's always there if I wanted to do it. But, I have John and my wife's sister's husband is also this guy named William Tonks, who just plays with everybody around town. And so, I go and see shows occasionally, but I just really don't have a lot of ambition to go out and play live because, frankly, I'm not that great at it. I don't really play. I just get up there and sing, and I'm just an old, ugly guy, and I don't have a whole lot to offer other than if you like the songs, So if I wanted to do something, and we're going to play a couple of shows with this record has kind of given me a reason to play again. I could do better, and if oddly enough, like Philadelphia and Chicago and Minneapolis, like that was where people, I would sell out places and stuff like that. And Athens people are kind of like, eh. Part of that had to do with when I was happening, when Bulk came out and was making all this press and stuff. At the same time, Olivia Tremor Control and Neutral Milk Hotel were happening. And I think that was kind of more in the wheelhouse of college folks rather than the kind of the old rootsy Rolling Stones junk I was peddling. Well, those are good folk. I really got to know Andrew Rieger of Elf Power, who's still kind of central to that whole thing. But he's a great guy, and he put out one of my records on his little labels, Orange Twin. So, I thought that was kind of brave of him,
Yeah, they had the Elephant Six Collective and whatever.
Oh, yeah. I mean, those are all good folks. I've met some of those folks. And that's another thing about Athens that continues, and I've never seen any difference in this, is that everybody, even if they don't particularly like your kind of music, is totally cordial and willing to help you out in any way. And, you end up with bands where you might have some punk rock guy playing with the Widespread Panic guy, and there's no competition. Nobody's kind of talking bad about other folks. That is the one constant thing that, and probably is why the scene is still kind of healthy, is that there really is a sense of cooperation, that either it happens or it doesn't.
How did Bones in the Desert come to be?
Well, once again, John was, back when he was playing with the Truckers, I guess they played in Denver a lot, and they met Scott out there. And Scott, I became so enamored with what he thought Athens would be, I guess, or maybe he was just kind of over Denver at the time or whatever. But he ended up moving he's a luthier, and he makes these just beautiful guitars. He ended up moving to Athens, and I think he's one of these guys that writes a lot of music, but just is always disappointed in his lyrics and doesn't really like that end of it. And John said, well, my brother-in-law will write, he'll write anything, anytime. We ended up kind of getting together. We hit it off right away, and he gave me a bunch of just stuff that he had, and I took it and kind of plugged it into my 4-track and put some words on it, and he flipped. He really liked it. So, and like I say, we were just doing this for kicks, like I do anyway, and he actually makes full money making guitars, and I think he was so into it that he said, well, let's just do a little small run of vinyl, and that was the magic word to me, because I was getting into vinyl again. So I was like, yeah, are you sure, man? I made it clear that, look, we may never sell these things, or we may sell the last one, 10 years from now. And he's like, that's fine. So it's kind of a vanity project. We're not that vain, we don't expect, just the fact that I'm talking to you about it is more than we expected, really. So, but it was nothing but fun, and John plays all over it, and all these other great local people, and it was just, there's no downside to it whatsoever. So,
did you know you can download each podcast for free? Just scroll down to the bottom of the page on countryfriedrock.org. So was it on your cassette recorder?
Well, when I initially wrote the stuff, he would give me CDs of just tracks, music, and I would take that and put the CD in my computer and then feed it into the 4-track. Then I'd have 3 tracks to put like vocals or whatever. And so I'd do that and I'd give it back to him, He just, he loved it. And I think part of the reason he liked it was because I'm not, like I say, I don't have this kind of musical background, so everything I do is pretty intuitive and just whatever, So a lot of times I think I ended up writing in the wrong spots, if you know what I mean, where what he would thought, okay, the verse goes here, the chorus goes here, blah, 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 and I would end up totally mixing that up. And the reason this works is instead of being kind of like, could you try that, doing it like this? He would be like, oh, that is so cool. How did you come? I never would have thought to do that. So, he was the perfect guy. Because that's what it takes. He wasn't looking to micromanage me on how I approached it. He's like, okay, here's the music, do what you want with it, and that's what I did. And he really got off on that.
Well, so then how did that work, bringing in different people to add some stuff to it?
Well, here's the thing, and I've said this, is my only contribution to this really is my stinky little lyrics and trying to sing somewhere in key, That's about all I had to do, because he got the music. Well, it works out for him since he's, selling guitars and stuff. He's got all these people coming in all the time, and he knows all these folks. He goes out to shows a lot more than I do. I got 2 younger kids, and it just doesn't work for me. So he knows all these folks, and he's one of these guys that everybody likes anyway. So it was pretty easy for him to recruit them. But and most of these folks I knew as well. So it was just one of those deals where, like, hey, you want to come over tonight and put blah-de-blah on this thing I'm working on? Like, yeah. And that's that's totally in the spirit of Athens. Usually, unless they got something else to do, they're like, oh, cool, let's do it.
Then did it have to get mixed anywhere?
He mixed it. He built some of the guitars on it.
Cool.
He wrote it. He wrote the music. He recorded it. We recorded at his place on his equipment.
Cool.
He mixed it. He saw it through the mastering process. I mean, he's really the guy. If there's any value to this record, and another thing is, the one thing that I kind of get picky about sometimes is mixes. I don't want the vocals too loud. I want to be able to hear it. I hate it when it's all drums and vocals and just a little bit of guitar and a little teeny bit of bass, teeny piano. I can't stand that. And I never once had to say a word. He'd play me his mixes, and it was right from the beginning. So that made it so easy for me. I just didn't have to worry about anything. John just is killer. Scott himself is just a great guitar player. This guy, John Mills on bass. Now, this guy, I don't know how to describe him. He's one of these guys that he's very quiet, I wouldn't say shy particularly, but, you might stand next to him and he might say 3 words over the course of an hour, But then, once you get to know him, he's a little bit more verbose. But he's one of these guys that you play him something, and he's a bass player, and he has got it, something super unique to do on it. There are people like that on it. So, would have had to work pretty hard to screw it up. I can do it, though, don't get me wrong.
How can someone buy this?
We have no distribution whatsoever, but there are 2 places you can go to. BaxendaleGuitar.com, that's Scott's business. And there's also a place called AthensMusic.net, and we're there as well. Oh, I do have a stupid little blog. The good thing about it, this will give you an idea of some of the other stuff that I do, like some of the just crude basement stuff, because it's one thing you might be into. I recently posted the Pete Buck cartoons on PDF format.
No way!
Yeah, so you can get those. You can just download those for free, and there's a bunch of music and stuff, like some of the Scott stuff, a lot of just my 4-track solo stuff, which is just can be excruciating. But if you like that kind of thing, some people do, and it's all free. There's no money or anything. If I can remember I think it's www.jack-logan.com. And if you just put in Jack Logan Enjoy Music, that's the name of the site, and the search engine, you could get there as well.
This is a little bit fangirlish for me. It's just fun and exciting.
Well, I'm glad that somebody actually paid attention to some of that stuff. Recently, like Clay gave me a copy, and I don't know what had happened to my copy, but my copy of the Coolies record with a comic book in it. It was so funny because I hadn't seen that in forever. I think somebody actually did a production of that as a rock opera. And
no way.
Yeah.
I missed that.
Me too. Hopefully somebody will revive that. And there are people that still cover crack pipe songs off that record, so that was neat to be part of that.
Take care. Thank you so much.
Same to you, and thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Country Fried Rock, music uncovered. Find our full playlist at countryfriedrock.org. You can subscribe to our weekly podcast on iTunes. Just search Country Fried Rock. Our theme music is from The Heap. Check them out at heapdeluxe.com. That's HEAPDELUXE. Our Country Fried Rock stinger is from Steve Soto and the Twisted Hearts. Country Fried Rock. Copyright 2013 by Lilypad Productions. All rights reserved. Country Fried Rock is a partnership with the nonprofit Florence Regional Arts Alliance. Your donations to this program are tax deductible to the extent you are eligible under U.S. law. Country Fried Rock radio programs are distributed to public radio through the Public Radio Exchange, prx.org.
Ever he been helping us some country fried rock.